This morning, South East Water flagged an operational water alert in Kent. A temporary use ban is now affecting about 850,000 customers, with record-treated water demand already active. One signal would be unusual. Several signals together are harder to dismiss. The company says high temperatures and near-record demand have pushed its Kent system beyond drought plan triggers. The Met Office had already issued rare, red, extreme heat warnings across parts of southeastern England. The UK Health Security Agency placed the southeast under a red heat health alert, and inside the water network, storage tanks were being drained faster than treatment works could refill them. But that is not the most dangerous part. The headline is not only a hosepipe ban. The hidden number is treatment capacity. Raw water can exist in the system, and winter rainfall can leave reservoirs healthier than people expect. But drinking water still has to be treated, pumped, stored, pressurized, and moved to taps. This is not just a hosepipe ban, this is a treatment capacity failure. So the question is no longer simply who can water a garden in July. The question is, what happens when heat-driven demand reaches the treatment works, the storage tank, the pressure zone, the care home, the kitchen, and the customer who only sees the warning when the tap begins to slow? Like, subscribe, and comment where you are watching from. Because this map is not only showing a water restriction, it is showing where system pressure may appear first. The first thing to understand is that this was not a normal summer notice posted on a company website. It was an operating signal. At the start of the alert window, South East Water announced that a temporary use ban was in place for customers across its Kent supply area. The restriction covered hosepipe use for private gardens, washing cars, cleaning patios and boats, and filling swimming pools or paddling pools. But the wording that mattered most was not about lawns. It was about treated drinking water. According to South East Water, sustained high temperatures and near record levels of demand for treated drinking water had forced the decision. The company said the restriction would help protect local water resources and keep drinking water available for essential daily needs, including hygiene, drinking, and cooking. That is the first light on the dashboard. A water company does not use that language when the problem is only dry grass. It uses that language when demand has started to push into the operational margin of the system. Then the second light appeared. By the same period, the Met Office was describing exceptional heat across parts of southeastern England. It had issued a red warning for extreme heat for a record third consecutive day under the current weather warning system. The warning area stretched across the southeast and included Kent. Forecasters warned that some daytime temperatures could exceed 36 degrees Celsius and perhaps rise to 37 degrees Celsius in some locations. One warning is weather. 3 consecutive red warnings are not just weather, they are a stress test. The Met Office also warned that the heat would be accompanied by humidity and uncomfortable warm nights. That detail matters because heat does not only raise daytime water use, it changes behavior across the whole day. People shower more, they wash more, they refill bottles more. They run outdoor taps for children, pets, plants, patios, and cooling. Demand does not arrive as one single surge. It arrives as millions of small decisions happening at once. Then the third light came from the public health system. The UK Health Security Agency had escalated heat health alerts across multiple English regions, including the southeast. In its own alert system, a red heat health alert means the risk can extend beyond the most vulnerable groups and may affect even the healthy population. It also signals possible impacts beyond healthcare, including transport, food, water, energy, and business. That is the operational clue. The water alert was not sitting alone. It was sitting beside a weather alert and a health alert. The same heat that made homes harder to cool also made the water network harder to balance. The same heat that raised risk for older people and people with medical conditions also raised demand for washing, drinking, cooking, cooling, and sanitation. On their own, these signals could be treated separately. Together, they describe one larger configuration. The map showed Kent under hosepipe restrictions. But the system was failing at treated water throughput. That is the shift. The visible event was a ban on non-essential water use. The deeper event was a race between demand and production. Southeast Water said every available treatment works, and water source was running at full capacity. It also said it was producing more than 100 million liters of extra water a day, roughly equal to supplying 3 towns the size of Maidstone. That number sounds like a solution until you hear the next sentence. The company said water was being drawn from regional drinking water storage tanks faster than it could physically be treated and refilled. That is not a garden problem. That is a system clock problem. Water has a sequence. It is abstracted from sources. It is treated. It is pumped. It is stored. It is pressurized. It is distributed through mains and local zones. A customer does not see that sequence. A customer sees a tap. But the tap is only the visible end of a long chain of timing. If demand rises faster than the chain can respond, the problem appears first as pressure, then as local disruption, then as no water in the places most exposed by elevation, distance, pipe layout, or storage depletion. This is why the phrase treatment capacity failure matters. It does not mean there is no water anywhere. It means the system is being asked to turn available water into safe, pressurized drinking water faster than its physical assets can manage under heat load. That is a different kind of shortage. It can happen even when winter rainfall has left raw water resources in a relatively healthy position. Southeast Water made that distinction clear through local notices. Raw water resources had been helped by winter rainfall, but demand had still breached triggers in the company drought plan. The emergency was not only the amount of water in the environment. It was the amount of drinking water the system could produce and move at the speed customers were using it. That is where the day becomes abnormal. In a normal summer, outdoor demand rises, but the network absorbs it. Treatment works increase output. Storage tanks refill overnight. Pumps maintain pressure. Crews fix leaks. Customers use water without thinking about the machinery behind it. But during this event, several assumptions began to break at the same time. The heat was persistent. The dry spring had already hardened the landscape. The National Drought Group had warned that spring rainfall showed a sharp north-south divide, with southern England receiving about half of average rainfall in recent months. Farmers were already dealing with earlier irrigation pressure in parts of the east and southeast. The public water system was entering summer, after a weather pattern that had swung from wet winter to dry spring to heat. That sequence matters because water networks do not only respond to today, they carry yesterday. A wet winter can fill raw water reserves. A dry spring can raise soil moisture deficits, dry gardens, increase irrigation demand, and prime customers to use more water when heat arrives. A heat wave can then turn stored water into a rapidly moving volume. Every shower, hose, paddling pool, and sprinkler becomes a small valve opening inside a much larger machine. If only one of those things happened, the system might bend. Together, they pull in different directions. The Environment Agency had already said that heat waves can drive spikes in water demand, and that finite water must be used wisely. The National Drought Group was monitoring water levels, rainfall patterns, farming pressure, and drought plans. That means the water company was not the only institution watching the pattern. The National Water Risk System had already started paying attention. Then the local network translated that national pattern into a county-level emergency. Kent became the place where the dashboard stopped being abstract. Across the county, customers received a message that sounded familiar but carried a deeper meaning. Do not use hose pipes for gardens. Do not wash cars with hose pipes. Do not clean patios. Do not fill domestic pools. Use water for essentials. Protect drinking water. Protect vulnerable customers. Those instructions sound simple. But inside the control room, each instruction has a hydraulic meaning. A sprinkler is not just a sprinkler. It is sustained flow during the hottest part of the day. A paddling pool is not just a paddling pool. It is a rapid draw on treated water when many other households are doing the same thing. A pressure washer is not just cleaning. It is high flow demand placed on a network that is trying to hold pressure for cooking, washing, toilets, medication, care homes, and hospitals. The customer sees a rule, the operator sees load. That is why the restriction was county-wide. South East Water said recent upgrades had strengthened parts of West Kent, including Tunbridge Wells and Tunbridge. But the heatwave was affecting storage levels across the county. That phrase is important. The problem was not isolated to one pipe, one street, or one treatment plant. It was distributed enough that a blanket approach became necessary. A localized burst can be repaired. A single pump failure can be isolated. A county-wide drawdown is harder because the pressure is not coming from one broken component. It is coming from demand across the system. This is the difference between an incident and a configuration. An incident has a location. A configuration has a pattern. On the operational map, the pattern included Kent under hosepipe restrictions surrounding southeast water areas, urged to use water only for essential purposes. Treatment works at maximum capacity. Extra production already added. Field teams chasing bursts and leaks. And network operators rerouting water to support areas seeing the steepest drops in storage. That is what a water emergency looks like before it becomes a dramatic image. It is not always a dry reservoir bed. It is a list of operational actions. Production at maximum capacity. Leak teams deployed. Storage tanks dropping. Water rerouted. Restrictions activated. Vulnerable customers protected. Essential services prioritized. The day was abnormal because the system had moved from routine management into active defensive operation. Every available treatment works, and source was being used. Storage was being defended. Non-essential demand was being cut. The company was trying to prevent the next stage, which would be supply interruptions spreading across the network. That is the part most people do not see. A hosepipe ban is not only punishment for waste. It is often an attempt to preserve pressure before failure becomes visible at the tap. It is the system asking customers to reduce demand before operators have to move from warnings to emergency water distribution. And this is where the emotional weight begins to change. For one household, the notice may feel inconvenient. The grass will brown, the car will stay dirty, the paddling pool will stay empty. But for the network, those small restrictions are trying to protect something far more basic. Enough water to drink, enough water to cook, enough water to wash hands, enough water for elderly people, disabled people, dialysis patients, care homes, schools, and clinics. The rule is about a hose. The reason is about continuity. And continuity is the quiet achievement of modern water systems. Most days, people do not think about treatment works. They do not picture storage tanks. They do not ask whether a pump station can keep pressure in a village on higher ground. The system is invisible because it works, but heat makes invisible systems visible. A hot day first appears as a forecast, then it appears as a public health alert, then it appears as demand, then it appears as storage drawdown, then it appears as pressure. Then it appears in kitchens, bathrooms, farms, shops, care homes, and schools. The forecast shows weather. The water network receives load. That is why this day cannot be understood as a simple summer restriction. The official sequence tells a different story. Southeast Water reported record demand and treated water stress. The Met Office warned of rare extreme heat across southeastern England. The UK Health Security Agency warned that heat could affect health, care, transport, food, water, energy, and business. The Environment Agency and National Drought Group were already monitoring dry conditions, drought risk, and public water demand. 4 systems were looking at the same summer from different angles. Weather saw heat, health saw risk to the body, water saw demand, drought planners saw reduced margin, the public saw a hosepipe ban, but the system saw convergence. That convergence is the day. It is not a scene of panic. It is more unsettling than panic because it is orderly. Alerts are issued, maps are updated, statements are written, teams are deployed, restrictions are defined, customers are asked to change behavior. The whole machine begins to adjust itself around one fact: Demand is arriving faster than treated water can be made, stored, and moved. This is not just a hosepipe ban. This is a treatment capacity failure. And once that sentence is visible, the next question becomes unavoidable. How does a number as ordinary as customer demand become a physical threat inside a water system that was supposed to be ready for summer? To answer that, we have to take the headline number apart. The headline number is about 850,000 customers, but the danger is not contained inside the number itself. It begins when that number is translated into daily behavior. 850,000 customers is not one giant crowd standing beside one reservoir. It is a dispersed operating load spread across homes, flats, farms, shops, schools, care settings, small businesses, gardens, kitchens, bathrooms, and pressure zones across Kent. It is every place where treated drinking water leaves the hidden part of the system and becomes ordinary life. According to South East Water, the restriction applies across its Kent supply area because sustained high temperatures and near-record demand for treated drinking water have created pressure on the network. The company is not only asking people to save water as a polite environmental habit, it is trying to reduce non-essential use so drinking water can keep reaching essential daily needs like hygiene, cooking, and drinking. That distinction is where the number starts to change shape. 850,000 customers does not only mean 850,000 notices. It means hundreds of thousands of possible taps, hoses, washing machines, showers, toilets, buckets, paddling pools, garden sprinklers, and outside connections all capable of opening at the same time during heat. A hosepipe ban sounds small because the word hosepipe feels domestic. It belongs in a garden, it curls on a wall, it sits beside a lawn. But in a water network, a hosepipe is not a garden object. It is a high-flow outlet connected to treated drinking water. South East Water says a garden hose can use up to 1,000 liters an hour, about the same as an average person uses in a week. That is the conversion that matters. One hose left running for an hour is not just an hour of watering. It is a week of personal water use, compressed into one small pipe. Now multiply that behavior across a hot county, where people are trying to cool pets, protect plants, wash patios, refill paddling pools, and rescue lawns after dry weather. Suddenly, the headline number is no longer a population figure. It is a synchronized demand problem. The number is not just customers. It is summer being pulled out of position. South East Water's own behind-the-scenes water status data showed daily demand reaching 670 million liters on Thursday, June 25th, while average daily demand for July was listed at 588 million liters. That difference is 82 million liters in a single day. To make that visible, imagine more than 30 Olympic swimming pools of extra treated drinking water being pulled through the system above a normal July day. Not rainwater, not lake water, not water waiting in a reservoir. Treated drinking water. Water that has already passed through the machinery and standards required to make it safe enough to enter homes. That is why the headline number should not be treated as a dry statistic. A county can look green from above and still be exhausting its treated water margin below the surface. A wet winter can leave raw water resources healthier than people expect and still not solve the problem of treatment speed. The public sees water as a stock. The system experiences water as a flow. That is the part most people are not taught to see. A reservoir stores potential. A treatment works, creates usable supply. A storage tank holds treated water close to demand. A pump station moves it under pressure. A distribution main carries it street by street. A customer opens a tap and assumes the whole sequence is ready. But when 850,000 customers are inside the same heat-driven pattern, the sequence becomes fragile. The official restriction means people should not use hosepipes for watering gardens, washing cars, cleaning patios and boats, or filling swimming and paddling pools. Ofwat says a hosepipe ban, formerly called a temporary use ban, exists because hosepipes use large amounts of water for activities that are often non-essential, and people can still use buckets or watering cans for some tasks. That legal detail matters because it shows how the system ranks demand. Drinking, cooking, washing, medical use, hygiene, animal welfare, and essential services sit on one side. Decorative, recreational, and convenience uses sit on the other. The ban is the moment the water system starts separating wants from needs, and the public does not usually see that separation until the margin is already under strain. The headline is 850,000 customers. The real story is that each customer is a possible decision point inside a hydraulic network. One person deciding not to use a hose may save 1,000 liters in an hour. One neighborhood deciding to stop outdoor watering may slow the drop in a local storage tank. One county deciding to reduce non-essential use may prevent pressure loss from spreading into kitchens and bathrooms. The number feels huge because it is huge, but it also feels misleadingly abstract. 850,000 customers do not all use water in the same way. A flat with one resident is not a care home. A care home is not a primary school. A school is not a farm shop. A farm shop is not a house with a large garden. A household with a dialysis patient is not a household that only wants a green lawn, but the network has to serve all of them through the same physical rule. Water must be treated before it can be delivered. Pressure must be maintained before it can reach the far end of the pipe. Storage must refill before tomorrow's demand begins. This is why the largest number is not just the number of customers. It is the number of customers placed inside the same peak demand window. In ordinary conditions, demand rises and falls across the day. Morning showers create one wave, evening cooking and washing create another. Summer gardens add a seasonal lift, but heat changes the timing. It pushes more people toward the same behaviors at the same moment. The hotter the afternoon becomes, the more tempting the hose becomes. The drier the garden looks, the more urgent watering feels. The longer the heat lasts, the more people stop thinking of outdoor water as optional. That is how a private choice becomes a public load. The hose in one garden does not know there is a pressure zone miles away losing margin. The person filling a paddling pool does not see the storage tank dropping. The car being washed in a driveway does not display the treatment works running flat out. But the system sees all of it. Every open hose is a small tunnel between treated water storage and the open air. The number is not frightening because people are malicious. It is frightening because normal behavior can become abnormal when the weather aligns it. That is the uncomfortable lesson of a heatwave water restriction. The system does not fail only when something breaks. Sometimes it starts to fail when too many ordinary actions become simultaneous. Southeast Water says every available water treatment works, and Source was running at full capacity, while operations teams were rerouting water across the network and leakage teams were trying to save every drop. That means the headline number was arriving after the company had already used the obvious internal levers: increase output, chase bursts, move water around, defend storage, ask customers to reduce demand. When those levers are not enough, the public restriction appears. It is not the first step, it is the step the public can see. And once the public can see it, the hidden part of the system has already been carrying the load. This is what makes the July timing important. July is supposed to be planned for. Water companies know summer arrives. They know outdoor demand rises. They know heat changes usage. They know school holidays, gardens, tourism, and long evenings shift water behavior. A July restriction is not surprising because summer is unknown. It is alarming because a known season has exceeded the prepared margin. The number is not just high demand. It is a calendar expectation being tested. A system built to handle normal summer demand is being asked to handle heatwave demand, dry spring demand, leakage control, treatment limits, and customer anxiety at the same time. That is different from saying the county has simply run out of water. Running out is a simple story. This is more precise and more unsettling. The water may exist in one form, but not fast enough in the form people need. The water may be present in the environment, but not yet treated, stored, pressurized, and delivered. The water may be produced in record volumes, but still not match the speed of the draw. That is why 670 million liters in a day does not sound reassuring by itself. If demand is rising faster than refill, A large production number can still describe a stressed system. A fire engine pumping water is doing work, but if the fire is taking more than the pump can supply, the pump, being busy, is not proof of safety, it is proof of strain. The same logic applies here. Producing more than usual does not automatically mean enough. It depends on how fast the treated water is leaving storage. This is the conversion the viewer has to hold on to. 850,000 customers become millions of daily uses. One hose becomes a week of personal consumption in an hour. 670 million liters becomes a visible daily load. 82 million liters above the July average becomes a gap that has to be found, treated, pumped, and held somewhere. A temporary use ban becomes the legal shape of a hydraulic emergency. The visible number makes the headline. The hidden system decides whether taps stay normal. And out in the real world, this number would not arrive as a dramatic wave. It would arrive quietly. A customer notices the hose rule first. Then a neighbor mentions low pressure. Then a school checks whether toilets and kitchens are reliable. Then a care home reviews its vulnerable residents. Then a small business wonders whether it can clean, cook, or serve customers if pressure drops. Then bottled water plans begin to matter. This is how a statistic walks into daily life. It does not announce itself as 850,000. It becomes one person turning a tap and listening. It becomes one garden left brown, so a storage tank can recover overnight. It becomes one family choosing between convenience and essential use. It becomes one operator watching a graph and asking whether the night will be long enough for refill. But the most important number is still waiting underneath the headline, because customer count tells us how wide the restriction is, and daily demand tells us how heavy the load is, but neither tells us the most important thing by itself. The real question is how quickly the system can turn available water into safe drinking water before the next wave of heat-driven demand arrives. And that is where the story moves from the headline number to the hidden number. The visible number is 850,000 customers. The hidden number is the speed of treatment. That is the number most people never see because it does not appear on a garden notice. It does not sit on the front page as one clean figure. It hides inside plant capacity, storage level, pumping rate, chemical dosing, filtration speed, pipe pressure, and overnight recovery. It is not the amount of water that exists somewhere in the wider environment. It is the amount of safe drinking water the system can make ready, hold in storage, and move through the network before demand pulls it back out. The visible number makes the headline. The hidden number writes the damage. At first, the public story looks simple. A heat wave arrives. People use more water. A water company announces a hosepipe ban. Gardens stop being watered. Cars stay dirty. Paddling pools stay empty. That is the surface version. It is true, but it is incomplete. It makes the restriction sound like a fight between lawns and reservoirs. But the system is not only fighting for reservoirs, it is fighting for time. According to Southeast Water, the problem in Kent is not only that customers are using more water during hot weather. The company says demand for treated drinking water has reached record or near record levels. Every available treatment works, and water source is running at full capacity. And regional drinking water, storage tanks are being drained faster than they can physically be treated and refilled. That sentence changes the story. The hidden danger is not just consumption, it is the refill rate falling behind the drawdown rate. Think of it as a tank with two flows. One flow enters after water has been treated and pumped. One flow leaves when customers open taps, showers, washing machines, toilets, hoses, and business connections. Under normal conditions, the incoming flow catches up, especially overnight when demand drops. The tank recovers. Pressure zones stabilize. The next morning begins with margin. During this event, that recovery becomes uncertain. That is the hidden number. How much water can be treated per hour? How much can be pumped into storage? How fast each storage tank is falling? How much overnight recovery remains before morning demand returns? Those numbers decide whether the restriction stays an inconvenience or becomes a supply problem. A customer does not feel treatment capacity directly. A customer feels it as pressure. The tap runs weaker. The shower changes tone. The toilet cistern fills slowly. A business checks whether it can clean safely. A care worker fills containers earlier than usual. Not because the water has stopped, but because trust in continuity has begun to weaken. The event is visible outside. The damage begins inside. Inside the treatment works. The process is not instant. Raw water has to be taken from sources, screened, cleaned, filtered, disinfected, tested, balanced, and moved into the distribution system. Every step has a physical limit. Pipes have diameter. Pumps have capacity. Filters have flow rates. Chemicals need contact time. Storage tanks have volume. Operators can push a system hard, but they cannot command water to become safe faster than the plant can process it. This is why the phrase, treated drinking water, is so important. Raw water is not the same as tap water. A river, reservoir, or underground source can hold water, but that water is not automatically ready for a kitchen. It has to be made safe. It has to meet drinking water standards. It has to be moved through a network without losing pressure or quality. In the public imagination, water shortage often means a cracked reservoir bed. In this case, the more precise image is different. It is a treatment line running flat out, while storage tanks fall anyway. That is more subtle. And it is more useful, because it shows how a system can be stressed even before the country looks empty. Southeast Water has said winter rainfall helped local raw water resources. That matters because it stops the story from becoming too simple. This is not just a dry spell draining every source at once. This is a heat-driven demand surge, meeting the treatment and distribution limits of a real water network. It is possible to have water in the broader system and still not have enough treated water in the right place at the right speed. That is the central turn. The headline is a hosepipe ban. The real story is throughput. Throughput is a plain word for how much can pass through a system in a given time. A road can have enough pavement, but still fail when too many cars enter at once. A hospital can have enough buildings, but still fail when too many patients arrive at the same time. A treatment works can have access to water, but still fail to match demand if the rate of use outruns the rate of production. This is not just a hosepipe ban. This is a treatment capacity failure, and that changes who is exposed first. The first people at risk are not always the heaviest users. They may be the people at the edge of the network. They may be on higher ground, where pressure is harder to maintain. They may live at the end of a long main, where any pressure drop arrives earlier. They may be in villages where the local storage tank has less margin. They may be medically vulnerable, elderly, or dependent on steady water for care. The hidden number decides the order of stress. When pressure is strong, the network feels equal. Every tap seems connected to the same promise. But when storage falls and pressure weakens, geography matters, elevation matters, distance matters, pipe age matters, local demand matters. A county-wide alert can become a very local hardship. That is why the ban is not only about fairness. It is about hydraulics. If enough households stop non-essential hose use, demand falls. If demand falls, storage tanks may recover. If storage tanks recover, pressure stabilizes. If pressure stabilizes, the network protects the customers who have the least flexibility. The restriction asks one part of society to stop optional flow, so another part can keep essential flow. But this creates a difficult psychological problem. People can see a green garden, they can see a dirty car, they can see a hot child asking for a paddling pool. They cannot see a storage tank 5 miles away failing to refill overnight. They cannot see a treatment works operating at maximum capacity. They cannot see the pressure curve, so the restriction can feel exaggerated until the tap changes. By then, the system has already lost part of its margin. That is the strange cruelty of infrastructure warnings. They work best before people believe them. If the warning succeeds, nothing dramatic happens. Taps keep running. The garden goes brown. Customers complain. The system survives. From the outside, that can look like overreaction. But in operational terms, that is the point. A ban is not proof that collapse has occurred. It is an attempt to keep collapse from arriving. Still, The hidden number does not disappear just because the public cooperates. It has to be watched hour by hour. Hot weather does not only create one peak. It creates repeated peaks: morning washing, afternoon outdoor demand, evening showers, nighttime recovery. Then the next day begins. If the nights stay warm, people use more water late. If demand does not fall enough overnight, storage does not recover. If storage does not recover, the next day begins weaker than the last. The danger is not only high demand, it is high demand repeated over time. A single heavy day can be absorbed if the system has recovery time. A sequence of heavy days begins to erase the buffer. This is the same logic that makes heat dangerous to the body. The hottest moment matters, but so does recovery. A person can endure a hot afternoon if the night cools down. A water system can endure peak demand if storage refills overnight. When recovery fails, the risk compounds. That is why a treatment capacity failure is different from a simple shortage. A shortage asks, how much is left? A capacity failure asks, can the system recover fast enough? That second question is harder, because the answer changes with every hour of demand. It depends on weather, customer behavior, plant condition, leakage, pump performance, pipe pressure, and how much water can be moved between zones without creating new problems somewhere else. Southeast Water said its teams were rerouting water across the network and using leakage teams to save every drop. Those actions reveal the hidden battle. Rerouting is not a public gesture. It is an operator trying to move pressure and volume toward weaker places. Leak repair is not only maintenance. In a high-demand event, every leak is treated water escaping before it reaches a person. A leak is not just waste on a spreadsheet. It is lost recovery time. This is the detail that makes the whole picture change. The system is not merely short of water. It is short of slack. Slack is the extra room that lets a network absorb surprise. Extra treatment capacity, extra storage, extra pump margin, extra time overnight, extra ability to move water between zones. When slack exists, heat becomes manageable. When slack disappears, every demand spike becomes consequential. 850,000 customers are not dangerous because 850,000 people are doing something wrong. The danger comes when many ordinary needs and many optional uses arrive inside a system with reduced slack. A shower is normal. A hose is normal. A toilet flush is normal. A business washing equipment is normal. A care home laundering bedding is normal. But normal loads can become abnormal when they overlap under heat. That is the hidden mechanism of demand. It does not need drama. It needs simultaneity. This is where the public language of a hosepipe ban can mislead. It makes the event sound like a rule about behavior. But the rule exists because the physical system has limits. The law says, do not use a hosepipe for certain non-essential purposes. The network says something deeper. It says the treated water chain is being pulled faster than it can reset. The visible rule is about restriction. The hidden number is about recovery. And recovery is the quiet line between inconvenience and disruption. If the system recovers overnight, the next day begins with pressure. If it does not, the morning begins with a deficit. That deficit then meets showers, toilets, breakfasts, schools, shops, farms, care visits, and heat. The system starts the day already tired. A tired system makes small faults larger. A burst main becomes harder to absorb. A pump trip becomes more serious. A local pressure issue spreads faster. A hot afternoon becomes less forgiving. A vulnerable customer becomes more exposed. The weak point does not have to be huge. It only has to appear when the buffer is gone. That is why the hidden number matters more than the headline number. Customer count tells us scale. Treatment capacity tells us fragility. Demand tells us load. Recovery tells us whether tomorrow begins safely. So when the public sees a hosepipe ban, the question should not be only whether the restriction is annoying or fair. The deeper question is what the ban is trying to protect before the system has to show visible failure. It is trying to protect the refill cycle. It is trying to protect pressure, It is trying to protect essential water before optional use turns into shared risk. And once you see that, the map looks different. The hosepipe ban is not the event, it is the symptom. The real event is a heat-driven demand pulse moving through treatment works, storage tanks, pumps, pipes, homes, and bodies. It begins as weather, it becomes behavior, it enters infrastructure, then it decides who still has pressure when the network is tired. The visible number makes the headline, the hidden number writes the damage. And to understand how that hidden number moves from a treatment works into a household, we have to follow the mechanism step by step. The mechanism begins before anyone opens a hose. It begins above southeastern England, where a stubborn zone of hot air settles over the region and turns an ordinary July water network into a timing problem. The Met Office described the heat as exceptional, with parts of the southeast placed under extreme heat warnings and temperatures high enough to push homes, roads, bodies, and infrastructure beyond their normal summer rhythm. But heat does not break a water system only by making the air hotter. It breaks the rhythm of demand. That is the first step. The atmosphere changes behavior. When the day gets hotter, people do not simply feel warmer. They reorganize the day around water. They drink more. They shower more. They fill bottles before leaving home. They wash children after school. They rinse pets. They water plants that look suddenly fragile. They fill paddling pools because a hot afternoon has become hard to manage indoors. They turn on sprinklers at the same time neighbors are doing the same thing. One household makes a private decision. Then thousands of households make the same private decision under the same sky. That is how weather becomes load. The mechanism begins above the county. It moves through the garden. Then it reaches the treatment works. A hosepipe looks harmless because it belongs to a domestic scene. It does not look like industrial demand. It looks like a person standing in a garden, trying to keep flowers alive. But in the water network, the hose is connected to the same treated drinking water system that supplies kitchens, bathrooms, care homes, clinics, schools, and businesses. Southeast Water has said one garden hose can use up to 1,000 liters in an hour, about the same as an average person uses in a week. That means the atmosphere can turn one small garden into a high-flow outlet. The heat does not need everyone to waste water. It only needs enough people to use water at the same time. That is the second step. Simultaneity. A water system is designed around patterns. Morning peaks, evening peaks, seasonal lifts, expected summer demand, planned treatment output, normal overnight recovery. These patterns allow operators to predict how much water must be treated, where it must be stored, and how much pressure must be held in each zone. The system does not assume that every customer will use maximum water at once. It survives because people usually stagger their use without thinking about it. Heat removes some of that staggering. It pulls behavior into the same hours. The hot afternoon becomes a county-wide instruction. Water the garden now. Fill the pool now. Take the extra shower now. Rinse the dog now. Cool the patio now. Refill the bottle now. The network does not care that each action feels small. It adds them as flow. This is why the phrase demand surge matters. It is not just more water. It is more water arriving at the wrong speed. According to Southeast Water, every available treatment works, and water source was running at full capacity during the restriction period, while regional drinking water storage tanks were being drawn down faster than they could be treated and refilled. That is the mechanical heart of the event. The treatment works are not symbolic. They are the factory floor of safe water. Raw water enters one side, drinking water leaves the other. Between those 2 points are screens, filters, disinfection, testing, pumping, safety standards, and time. Water cannot skip that sequence. That is the third step, treatment capacity. Raw water is not automatically tap water. A reservoir can hold water. A river can carry water. An underground source can store water. But none of that water becomes safe drinking water simply because customers need it quickly. It has to pass through treatment. It has to meet drinking water standards. It has to be moved into storage and then into the network. Operators can increase output. Plants can run hard, pumps can move more, but every asset has a physical limit. A filter has a maximum flow, a pump has a maximum rate, a storage tank has a fixed volume, a main has a pressure limit, a treatment plant has a ceiling. This is why a treatment capacity failure can happen even when the landscape does not look empty. The problem is not only how much water exists in nature, the problem is how fast the system can convert that water into safe, delivered supply. Imagine a kitchen with a large pantry but one small stove. There may be food in the building, but if a crowd arrives faster than meals can be cooked, the shortage appears at the plate. The pantry is not empty. The service line is overwhelmed. The same idea applies here. The raw water may be present in the wider system, but the treated water line can still fall behind. That is what makes this event so easy to misunderstand. The public asks, how can there be a hosepipe ban if winter was wet? The system answers, because winter rainfall does not automatically increase July treatment throughput. A wet winter can support raw water resources. It can fill reservoirs, recharge aquifers, and reduce one kind of scarcity. But July demand still has to be met through physical assets operating in real time. If treated water is leaving storage faster than it can be replaced, the system is under strain, no matter how simple the reservoir story looks from the outside. The map shows water in the region, but the system is failing at conversion speed. That is the fourth step: storage drawdown. Treated water storage tanks are the buffer between production and use. They are not decorative pieces of infrastructure. They are the pause that keeps the system stable. During lower demand periods, treated water fills storage. During peaks, storage releases water into the network. If the tanks recover overnight, the next day begins with margin. If they do not, the next day begins already weakened. This is where the mechanism becomes dangerous over time. A single hot day can be difficult. Several hot days can be different. The first day pulls storage down. The night tries to rebuild it. If the night is warm and demand stays high, recovery is incomplete. The second day begins lower. Then the afternoon peak arrives again. More water leaves. The night tries again. Recovery falls short again. By the third day, the system is not only fighting heat. It is fighting accumulated deficit. The danger is not only the peak, it is the failure to recover between peaks. That is why the body and the water system resemble each other during heat. A human body can survive a hot day if it cools at night. A water network can survive a demand spike if storage refills at night. When the nights stop providing enough recovery, both systems become more fragile by the hour. The mechanism then moves from storage into pressure. Pressure is the invisible promise of the tap. It is what turns stored water into usable water at the end of a pipe. Without enough pressure, water does not reach every customer equally. Low-lying areas may still receive supply while higher ground weakens first. Customers close to strong parts of the network may notice little, while those at the edge of a pressure zone feel the failure earlier. The map may show one service area, but the lived experience can be uneven street by street. That is the fifth step: hydraulic inequality. When a network is full and pressure is healthy, the system feels universal. A tap is a tap. A shower is a shower. Every home seems connected to the same guarantee. But when storage drops, the hidden geography appears. Elevation matters. Distance from a main matters. Pipe diameter matters. Local demand matters. Age of assets matters. A village on higher ground can become more exposed than a neighborhood closer to a storage tank. A care home at the edge of the network can depend on pressure decisions made miles away. The system that felt equal becomes local. That is why operators reroute water. Rerouting sounds simple, as if water can be sent around like traffic. But water is heavier, slower, and more constrained than a car. It has to move through pipes of fixed size. It has to maintain pressure without damaging the network. It has to avoid stirring sediment or creating quality problems. It has to support one zone without weakening another. In a strained system, moving water is not just logistics. It is triage. The company said operations teams were rerouting water across the network, and leakage teams were working to save every drop. Those are not minor details. They show that the mechanism had entered the control room. Operators were no longer only producing water, they were defending balance. Then the mechanism reaches leaks. A leak during normal conditions is waste. A leak during a treatment capacity failure is stolen recovery. Every liter lost through a burst or hidden leak is a liter that has already passed through treatment but never reaches a useful tap. It is not only lost water, it is lost treatment time, lost pumping energy, lost pressure, and lost storage. Under heat load, a leak becomes more than a maintenance issue. It becomes a hole in the buffer. That is the sixth step, margin loss. Margin is what keeps small faults small. When storage is healthy, a burst pipe can be isolated. When demand is moderate, a pump problem can be managed. When pressure zones have slack, operators can shift water. But when the system is already running near maximum, the same fault becomes more serious. A small failure arrives into a system with less room to absorb it. This is how extreme weather exposes infrastructure. It does not always invent a brand new weakness. Often it removes the slack that had been hiding old ones. The heat did not create every leak. It did not build every treatment works. It did not design every pipe. But by driving demand upward and recovery downward, it made the network's limits visible. That is the hidden mechanism of system risk. Weather becomes behavior. Behavior becomes flow. Flow becomes drawdown. Drawdown becomes pressure loss. Pressure loss becomes local vulnerability. Local vulnerability becomes a human problem. By the time it becomes visible, the system is already carrying load. This is not just a hosepipe ban. This is a treatment capacity failure. And the phrase is not meant to sound dramatic. It is meant to be exact. The failure is not necessarily a total collapse. It is a failure of margin, a failure of timing, a failure of the treatment and storage cycle to keep ahead of synchronized demand under heat. That is why the word capacity matters more than the word ban. A ban can be lifted. Capacity remains physical. A treatment works does not become larger because a heat wave arrives. A storage tank does not double because customers are anxious. A pressure zone does not ignore elevation because the afternoon is hotter than expected. The system can be optimized, operated, patched, and defended. But the physical ceilings are real. This is where the mechanism moves through the environment into daily life. Start with the atmosphere. A dome of heat sits over the southeast. The air dries gardens and raises discomfort. The discomfort changes household decisions. Household decisions open taps and hoses. The open taps pull treated water from local storage. The storage tanks fall faster than they refill. The treatment works run flat out. The pumps try to hold pressure. The pressure zones begin to show stress. The most exposed customers feel it first. A child asks for a drink. A carer prepares a wash. A school kitchen checks its taps. A small business pauses cleaning. An elderly resident notices the shower weaken. The mechanism has traveled from the sky to the body through pipes most people never see. That is the seventh step. Translation. The climate signal is translated into a human signal by infrastructure. Heat alone does not decide whether a tap slows. The water system translates heat into demand, demand into pressure, and pressure into lived experience. That translation can soften the shock when the system has margin. It can intensify the shock when the system is already strained. The same outdoor temperature can produce different outcomes depending on infrastructure. In a system with spare treatment capacity, larger storage, low leakage, and flexible supply routes, a heat wave may remain manageable. In a system with tight margins, high demand, constrained treatment, leakage pressure, and uneven geography, the same heat can become an operational emergency. That is why climate risk is not only about the weather, it is about what the weather finds when it arrives. The weather found a network under load, and the oddest part is that the mechanism can remain invisible to people who are still receiving water normally. A household with good pressure may assume the problem is exaggerated. A household on higher ground may be filling containers. Both experiences can be true at the same time. Infrastructure failure often arrives unevenly before it becomes obvious. That unevenness is hard to communicate. A warning has to speak to the whole county before every home feels the same risk. It has to ask people with normal pressure to conserve water for people who may lose pressure first. It has to turn an invisible system problem into a visible public rule. That is what the temporary use ban does. It converts the hidden mechanism into behavior change. The ban is not the mechanism. The ban is the brake. The mechanism is heat-driven, demand, outrunning treatment, storage, and pressure recovery. And once that mechanism is understood, the event becomes less mysterious. It becomes more serious, but also more understandable. The water company is not only trying to protect reservoirs, it is trying to slow the outward flow from treated storage long enough for production to catch up. It is trying to create time inside a system that is losing it. That is the whole event in one sentence. Heat is taking time away from the water network. Time to treat, time to refill, time to recover, time to repair, time to move water before the next peak begins. And because time is the hidden resource, the next part of the story has to leave the control room. A mechanism is only an explanation until it touches a person. To understand what treatment capacity failure means, we have to follow it into one home, one room, one body, and one decision made under a hot July sky. The body does not experience a treatment capacity failure as a policy notice. It experiences it as a room becoming too warm, a glass being refilled twice as often, a shower that someone hopes will still run with enough pressure, and a small private calculation that did not exist the week before. How much water should be used now? How much should be saved? What happens if the tap slows later? Follow one household in Kent on the day the restriction becomes real. The house is not dramatic. It is not a disaster scene. It is a semi-detached home on a residential street, with a small back garden, a kitchen that gets too warm by late afternoon, and an elderly woman sleeping in the front room because the upstairs bedroom holds the heat too long. Her daughter has come over before work. She checks the windows, closes the curtains on the sunny side, fills a jug, puts medication beside it, and listens to the forecast in the background. The Met Office has warned of extreme heat across the southeast. The UK Health Security Agency has placed the region under a red heat health alert, the kind that signals risk beyond the most vulnerable groups and possible pressure on health, transport, water, energy, food, and business. But inside this house, those official categories collapse into one question: will the day stay manageable? At first, everything looks ordinary. The tap runs. The kettle fills. The toilet flushes. The daughter wets a cloth and leaves it by the chair. She reminds her mother to drink before she feels thirsty. She checks the small fan. She looks out at the garden, where the grass has turned pale and the soil has pulled away from the edge of the flower beds. The visible problem is heat, but the hidden mechanism is already inside the house. The heat has entered through brick, glass, roof tiles, and still air. It has entered the body through sweat, thirst, fatigue, and disturbed sleep. It has entered the routine through extra washing, extra drinking, extra laundry, and the urge to cool anything that can be cooled. The same atmosphere that raised county-wide water demand is now changing decisions inside one kitchen. That is the human pathway. From the sky to the room. From the room to the body. From the body to the tap. From the tap to the storage tank. From the storage tank back to the whole county. The daughter sees the Southeast Water notice on her phone. Temporary use ban. Kent. Hosepipes restricted. The company says demand for treated drinking water has reached record or near record levels. It says all available treatment works and water sources are running at full capacity. It says regional drinking water storage tanks are being drained faster than they can physically be treated and refilled. For a moment, the notice feels almost unrelated to her mother. The mother is not watering a lawn. She is not washing a car. She is not filling a pool. She is sitting in a hot room trying to keep steady through a heat wave. But that is exactly why the restriction matters. The ban is not mainly about punishing outdoor use. It is about protecting the water that must remain available for people who cannot reduce their essential needs. A garden can be left brown. A vulnerable body cannot be asked to wait for the treatment works to catch up. That is the quiet, moral structure of the event. In the garden next door, someone has already stopped watering. The plants lean under the afternoon sun. A few streets away, another person may still be tempted to run a hose because the soil is cracking and the tomatoes are curling. That person may not feel reckless. They may feel protective. They may have spent months growing the garden. They may think one short watering cannot matter. But Southeast Water says a hosepipe can use up to 1,000 liters in an hour, roughly the same as an average person uses in a week. In this story, that comparison is not abstract. 1 hour of outdoor water can become a week of personal use, pulled from the same treated system that must keep this elderly woman drinking, washing, and taking medication in a hot room. The body does not see the hose. The network does. The daughter fills another jug before leaving for her shift. She is not panicking. She is adapting. That is what people do first in system stress. They do not announce that infrastructure is failing. They add small precautions. They put water in the fridge. They avoid running the washing machine. They delay cleaning the patio. They check on a neighbor. They ask whether the pharmacy will still be open. They think about toilets, pets, medication, and whether an older person will remember to drink. This is how a county-wide alert becomes household labor. It creates work. Not dramatic work, quiet work. The kind that is often done by daughters, sons, carers, nurses, neighbors, and friends. The official notice says, conserve water. The household translation is, reorganize the day. And heat makes every decision heavier. The mother has a heart condition. She is not in immediate danger, but heat narrows her margin. Her daughter knows the signs to watch for: dizziness, confusion, unusual tiredness, nausea, a dry mouth, a headache. The red heat health alert does not need to become a hospital admission to matter. It matters because the body has less room for error. Water is part of that margin. Not just drinking water, washing water, cooling water, toilet water, water for cleaning a glass, water for making food, water for taking pills, water for a damp cloth placed on the back of the neck, water for dignity. When pressure is normal, those needs feel automatic. When pressure becomes uncertain, they become visible. This is the human meaning of treatment capacity. It is not a plant on a map. It is whether the invisible chain behind the tap can remain ordinary for someone who depends on ordinary things, staying ordinary. By mid-afternoon, the house is hotter than the outside air makes it seem. The curtains have done what they can. The fan moves warm air from one side of the room to the other. The mother drinks because she has been told to, not because her body sends a clear signal. Older people often feel thirst less sharply. Heat can confuse the warning system inside the body. The room becomes a place where small delays matter. Then the daughter's phone vibrates again. A message from a neighbor asks whether anyone else has noticed lower pressure. This is the moment when infrastructure leaves the official page and enters the nervous system. The tap still runs, but now every use feels like a test. The daughter calls her mother. She asks if the tap is working. She tells her not to worry. She tells her to keep the jug nearby. The words are calm, but the question behind them is not calm. How close is the system? Maybe the lower pressure is local. Maybe it is temporary. Maybe it is only perception. Maybe it has nothing to do with the wider restriction. The evidence line matters. Not every weak shower is proof of system failure. Not every local pressure change has the same cause. But the alert changes how people interpret small signals. A tap that would have gone unnoticed yesterday becomes part of a larger pattern today. That is one of the hidden costs of infrastructure stress. It steals certainty before it steals service. For the mother, uncertainty has a physical effect. She uses less water, but not always in the safest way. She waits longer before washing. She hesitates before flushing. She tells herself not to be a burden. This is common in constrained systems. People begin conserving even when their needs are essential. The public message says, stop non-essential use. Vulnerable people may hear, use less. That is why communication has to be careful. The system needs gardens to go dry, not older people to drink less. The daughter comes back in the evening and notices the jug is still half full. That detail matters more than the brown lawn. She does not scold. She pours a glass and sits with her mother until she drinks it. Outside, the heat is still radiating from the pavement. Inside, the day has become a sequence of small negotiations with water. This is not what most people imagine when they hear hosepipe ban. They imagine lawns and fines. The real pathway is more intimate. A public restriction enters a private home. A network pressure problem becomes a care routine. A heatwave becomes a question of whether a person drinks enough before bedtime. A treated water bottleneck becomes a daughter watching a glass. The event is visible outside. The damage begins inside. Now widen the lens by one step. The daughter works in a small care setting. Her workplace has its own version of the same problem. More laundry because residents are sweating. More drinks served through the day. More hand washing. More cleaning. More concern about warm rooms. More staff time spent watching bodies that are less able to regulate heat. The water demand there is essential. It cannot be eliminated without creating another risk. This is how a water restriction sorts society by flexibility. Some uses can stop immediately, some can be reduced, some cannot safely stop at all. A lawn has flexibility, a car wash has flexibility, a patio has flexibility, a care home has almost none, a person with a medical condition has less, a family with a baby has less, a school kitchen has less, a clinic has less. The treatment capacity problem becomes a social problem, because not every customer can respond in the same way. The network sees flow. Society feels unequal flexibility. That is why asking the public to save water is not just a technical request. It is a redistribution of margin. Every optional liter not used outdoors leaves more room for essential liters indoors. The question is whether enough people understand that before local pressure problems make it obvious. In the evening, the mother's street cools slowly. The garden is still dry. The hose remains coiled. That coil is now part of the emergency response. Even if it looks like nothing, a hose not used is treated water not pulled from storage. A paddling pool not filled is pressure preserved somewhere else. A car not washed is time returned to the treatment works. But there is no applause for prevention. There is only the absence of a worse outcome. That absence is easy to misunderstand. If the tap keeps working, some people will say the ban was unnecessary. If the ban fails and taps weaken, others will say it came too late. Operators live inside that impossible space. They must ask for behavior change before the proof becomes undeniable. The household lives inside it too. By night, the daughter checks the tap again. It runs. That sound is ordinary. And because it is ordinary, it is almost invisible. But after a day like this, ordinary is not nothing. Ordinary is the result of treatment works running at maximum capacity, pumps holding pressure, storage tanks being defended, leakage crews searching for losses, operators rerouting water, and thousands of customers deciding not to open a hose. The mother drinks one more glass before sleeping. The room is still warm. The night may not give the body enough recovery. The network may not get enough recovery either. That parallel is the part that stays with you. A body under heat needs nighttime relief. A water system under demand needs overnight refill. If either begins the next day depleted, the next load lands harder. This is not just a hosepipe ban. This is a treatment capacity failure. And through one household, the phrase stops being technical. It becomes a warning about how close essential life sits to hidden infrastructure. The tap is not the beginning of water. It is the end of a chain. When heat pushes that chain hard enough, the first visible struggle may be a garden rule, but the reason for the rule is a person in a warm room who still needs water to remain boring, reliable, and there. That is why the next weak point matters so much, because if the system begins to fail, it will not fail everywhere at once. It will fail first at the small component where recovery, pressure, and demand meet. The weak point is not the whole water system. The weak point is the treatment works and storage refill cycle. That sounds too technical to be dramatic, but it is exactly where the July restriction becomes serious. A water network can survive a hot day if the treatment works can keep producing, if storage tanks can recover, if pumps can hold pressure, and if local zones do not fall too far before demand drops. The system does not need every part to break. It only needs the refill cycle to fall behind long enough for pressure to weaken. That is the small component hiding inside the big story. Not the reservoir, not the garden, not the hose. The refill cycle. Under normal conditions, this cycle is almost invisible. Water is taken from sources, treated to drinking standards, pumped into service reservoirs or storage tanks, then released through the distribution network as customers use it. During lower demand periods, especially overnight, the tanks recover. They refill while people sleep. By morning, the system has rebuilt enough margin to handle the next wave of showers, breakfasts, toilets, schools, shops, and workplaces. That overnight recovery is one of the quiet miracles of the system. People do not wake up and thank a storage tank. They just open the tap. But during the Kent restriction, Southeast Water said drinking water storage tanks were being drained faster than they could physically be treated and refilled. That is the weak point, stated plainly. The system was not only working hard, it was losing the race between outflow and refill. This is not just a hosepipe ban. This is a treatment capacity failure. The phrase capacity failure does not have to mean total collapse. It can mean the system no longer has enough spare room to absorb the next peak safely. It can mean the treatment works are running flat out. It can mean storage does not recover fully overnight. It can mean pressure zones begin the day with less margin than operators want. It can mean one burst main, one pump issue, one localized demand spike, or one very hot afternoon has more power than it would have had under normal conditions. The weak point is not the whole system. The weak point is the part that was supposed to reset before morning. Think of a battery. If the battery drains during the day and fully charges at night, the device keeps working. But if the day drains faster and the night only partially restores it, the next day begins weaker. After enough cycles, the device can still turn on, but it has lost resilience. That is what a treated water storage system can become during heat-driven demand. It is not instantly empty. It is progressively less recovered. That is why the timing matters. A single peak is stressful. Repeated peaks become structural. The first afternoon lowers storage. The first night tries to refill. If demand remains high, recovery is incomplete. The second morning begins with less buffer. The second afternoon pulls harder. The second night has more work to do. If the pattern continues, operators are not only managing today, they are carrying the deficit from yesterday. This is how an event becomes a system problem. It accumulates. A customer sees a rule about a hosepipe. An operator sees a tank curve that did not climb enough before dawn. The treatment works, sits at the center of that curve. It is the place where available water becomes usable water. And because drinking water must be safe, the treatment process cannot simply be rushed without limits. Screening, filtration, disinfection, quality checks, chemical dosing, and pumping all have physical ceilings. The plant may be able to run harder, but it cannot ignore the laws of flow, contact time, equipment capacity, and safety. That is the key difference between water in nature and water in a tap. A river can carry more water than a treatment works can process. A reservoir can hold more water than a network can deliver in 1 hour. An aquifer can store water that still has to be abstracted, treated, and pumped. The public often thinks about water as a stock. Infrastructure experiences water as a timed sequence. The weak point is the sequence. If treatment is slower than demand, storage falls. If storage falls, pressure becomes harder to maintain. If pressure weakens, the edge of the network feels it first. If the edge weakens, the event leaves the company statement and enters real life. The edge can be a village on higher ground. It can be a street at the end of a main. It can be a care setting that depends on steady pressure for washing, toilets, cleaning, and food preparation. It can be a household with medical needs. It can be a small business that cannot operate without water. The weak point begins as infrastructure, but it does not stay there. Pressure is where the system tells the truth. When pressure is healthy, Most customers experience the network as equal. A tap in one house feels like a tap in another. The geography of pipes, pumps, elevations, and storage remains hidden. But when pressure begins to fall, the hidden map reappears. Higher ground becomes harder to serve. Longer supply routes become more vulnerable. Older pipes may leak more. Local demand spikes matter more. The system stops feeling universal and starts feeling uneven. That unevenness is not a flaw in perception. It is physics. Water has weight. It needs pressure to climb. It loses energy as it moves through pipes. Pumps and storage tanks help overcome that. But they have limits. When the system has margin, those limits are hidden. When the margin is gone, the network reveals its shape through low pressure and interruptions. This is why storage tanks are not passive containers. They are pressure insurance. They sit between the treatment works and the customer. They absorb the gap between when water is produced and when water is used. They help stabilize supply when demand rises. They give operators time. Without enough recovery in those tanks, the network has to meet real-time demand with less cushion. And when heat is driving demand, real-time becomes unforgiving. A hot afternoon does not politely wait for the treatment works. It arrives across thousands of homes at once. It arrives as showers, taps, hoses, toilets, washing, cooking, cleaning, and cooling. It arrives through people trying to make a dangerous day more bearable. It arrives through ordinary acts that become extraordinary only because they happen together. The storage tank does not know which liter is essential and which is optional. It only knows outflow. That is why the restriction targets non-essential hosepipe use. A hose can move a lot of treated water quickly. Southeast Water has said one garden hose can use up to 1,000 liters an hour, about the same as an average person uses in a week. Ofwat says hosepipe restrictions exist because hosepipes use large amounts of water, often for non-essential purposes. In a strained system, stopping that flow is one of the fastest ways to slow the fall in storage. The garden becomes connected to the storage tank. The storage tank becomes connected to the care home. The care home becomes connected to the treatment works. The treatment works becomes connected to the weather. This is the chain. And the weak point is where the chain cannot reset. Leakage makes that weak point sharper. A leak during normal conditions is serious waste. A leak during a treatment capacity event is treated water escaping after the system has already spent time, energy, chemicals, and pumping capacity to make it safe. It is water that counts against treatment capacity, but never arrives as useful supply. It lowers pressure, drains storage, and steals recovery time. That is why leakage teams matter during heat. They are not only fixing pipes, they are protecting the refill cycle. Every liter saved from a burst or hidden leak is a liter that does not have to be replaced before morning. Every repaired leak gives the treatment works a little more room to catch up. Every reduction in unnecessary demand gives storage a chance to climb. The event becomes a battle over small margins. The public often wants a single dramatic weak point, like a broken dam or an empty reservoir. But modern infrastructure often weakens through margin loss rather than sudden collapse. A treatment works at maximum capacity is still functioning. A storage tank that is falling is still holding water. A network with pressure stress is still delivering somewhere. That makes the danger harder to see. Failure does not always begin with silence at the tap. Sometimes it begins with the system having no easy move left. Maximum production, reduced storage, high demand, rerouting, leak repairs, public restriction, vulnerable customer planning. Those are not separate details. They are the shape of a network defending its last margins. A water company can reroute supply, but rerouting has limits. Pipes have fixed diameters. Pressure zones are designed around geography. Moving more water into one area can reduce margin somewhere else. A pump can push harder, but not infinitely. Operators can balance one part of the system against another, but the whole network still obeys the same physical ceiling. If treated water is leaving storage too fast, every operational move is temporary unless demand falls or treatment capacity catches up. This is why the weak point is not a single tank, a single pipe, or a single pump. It is the cycle that links them. Treatment output feeds storage. Storage supports pressure. Pressure supports customers. Customers create demand. Demand drains storage. Storage calls for treatment output. When that loop is balanced, the system feels boring. When the loop is unbalanced, the whole county can move toward restriction, even without one spectacular failure. That is the operational meaning of systemic risk. A weak point can be a loop, and when the loop weakens, the human consequences do not arrive evenly. A healthy adult in a home with normal pressure may experience the event as a nuisance. An elderly person on higher ground may experience it as anxiety. A parent with a baby may experience it as planning. A care home may experience it as risk management. A small cafe may experience it as uncertainty about hygiene and service. A school may experience it as a question about toilets and kitchens. The same system strain becomes different kinds of pressure depending on who has flexibility. That is why essential use has to be protected before optional use. The system cannot ask a care home to stop washing residents. It cannot ask a household to stop drinking. It cannot ask a clinic to pause hygiene, but it can ask gardens, cars, patios, and pools to wait. That is not only conservation, it is prioritization inside a limited physical network. The moral decision is carried by the infrastructure. A storage tank does not make ethical choices, but when it falls too low, society has to. This is the part that makes the weak point visible. A hosepipe ban is not only a legal instrument, it is a social instruction issued because an infrastructure loop has lost margin. The public is being asked to help repair the loop through behavior. Do not open the high-flow outlet. Do not drain treated storage for optional uses. Give the treatment works time. Give the tank time. Give pressure time. Time is the missing component, not just water. Time, the weak point, is time inside the refill cycle. Time to treat, time to pump, time to refill, time to find leaks, time to stabilize pressure, time to recover before the next hot day. When time disappears, even a working system can feel fragile. Operators may still be producing record volumes. Pumps may still be running. Crews may still be deployed. Customers may still be receiving water. But the system is operating without enough rest. It is like a hospital with beds full, but doors still open. It has not failed completely, yet every new arrival matters more. That is where the July event becomes more than a local inconvenience. It shows how climate-driven demand can expose an infrastructure design assumption. The old assumption is that summer peaks are manageable within planned capacity and recovery windows. But when heat is intense, demand is synchronized, nights stay warm, and storage cannot rebuild quickly enough. That assumption is tested. The system is not asked to do something unfamiliar. It is asked to do something familiar too fast, too often, and with too little recovery. That is a different kind of failure. Not a broken machine, a tired loop. And tired loops are dangerous because they can appear functional until they are not. The tap runs until pressure falls. The tank holds water until recovery fails. The treatment works, produces at maximum capacity until demand exceeds output. The network reroutes until there is nowhere easy left to reroute. The warning works until people stop believing it. The weak point is not the whole system. The weak point is the small, hidden interval between one day's demand and the next day's readiness. If that interval is long enough, the system survives. If it shrinks, every hot day carries more weight. And if it disappears, the event stops being about hose pipes and starts being about whether essential water can stay reliable in the places that need it most. That is why this July restriction matters. It reveals the component most people never think about, not the dramatic reservoir, not the visible garden, not the headline customer number, the refill cycle. The ordinary overnight recovery that keeps modern water systems invisible. When that recovery weakens, the whole story changes. And this is not speculation, because versions of this mechanism have already left evidence behind. This is not speculation. A version of this mechanism has already left evidence behind, not as a theory, not as a distant model, not as a warning buried in a technical appendix that no household ever reads. It has appeared before in Kent and Sussex as low pressure. No water, bottled water stations, emergency calls, angry customers, and official scrutiny. That is why the July hosepipe ban cannot be treated as an isolated summer inconvenience. It arrives after a record of supply stress in the same broad region, under the same deeper theme. When demand, weather, infrastructure, and weak headroom meet, the water system can lose its ability to keep pressure normal. The past does not prove that the present will follow the same path, but it proves the pathway is real. Ofwat, the water regulator for England and Wales, has already investigated South East Water for repeated supply interruptions between 2020 and 2023. According to Ofwat, those disruptions affected more than 286,000 people. The regulator said the company failed to maintain resilience in its supply system, failed to maintain key infrastructure, and failed to plan sufficiently to ensure enough headroom during periods of high demand. That phrase, enough headroom, is the historical echo of the July problem. Headroom is not a dramatic word. It is the difference between strain and disruption. It is spare capacity, spare storage, spare pumping margin, spare time, spare ability to move water when the first plan is not enough. A household does not use the word headroom when the tap runs dry. It says, there is no water. But the failure begins earlier, when the system no longer has enough room to absorb heat, demand, equipment faults, and local pressure stress at the same time. That is the precedent. A supply system does not have to be empty to fail. It can fail because its margin is too thin. The House of Commons Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee later examined South East Water's record and described a disproportionate number of supply interruptions in the eastern part of the company's region since the 2018 Beast from the East incident. The committee report listed repeated episodes in which tens of thousands of customers in Kent and Sussex experienced low or no water pressure across multiple years, including incidents in 2020, 2022, 2023, and 2025. The exact triggers were not all the same. That matters. Some events were linked to extreme cold and freeze-thaw damage. Some were linked to bursts. Some were linked to storms. Some were linked to high demand in hot weather. Some involved treatment works or pumping issues. It would be false to collapse all of them into one single cause. The warning does not need that kind of exaggeration. The evidence is already enough. The common thread is not one weather type. The common thread is resilience under stress. A cold event can expose weak pipes. A hot event can expose treatment and demand limits. A storm can expose power and pumping dependence. A burst main can expose the lack of redundancy in a local zone. Different triggers can reveal the same structural question. Does the system have enough buffer when normal assumptions break? That is why the July restriction sits inside a longer story. In late May of 2026, before the July ban, hundreds of homes in Kent and Sussex were reported to have experienced supply outages and low pressure during hot weather. South East Water said increased demand had strained its ability to pump drinking water, especially to properties on higher ground. At the peak, about 800 properties in Kent villages such as Charing, Challock, and Moulash were affected, with other customers in Sussex also facing disruption. The company asked people to use water only for essential purposes. That was not the same event as the July temporary use ban, but it was a preview of the same vulnerability: high demand, pumping strain, higher ground affected first. Essential use messaging. Local pressure trouble appearing before the public fully understands the network problem. The map shows affected villages, but the system is failing at margin. The detail about higher ground is especially important. It shows how a general county-wide stress turns into specific local hardship. Water does not move through a pipe network as an abstract service promise. It moves under pressure against distance, elevation, friction, and local demand. When the system is strong, those differences are hidden. When it weakens, they decide who feels the failure first. That is not a public relations problem. It is physics. A person on higher ground may lose pressure, while another customer lower down still sees water running normally. Both experiences can be true at the same time. That unevenness has appeared in past incidents, and it is exactly why operators worry about storage refill, pressure zones, and peak demand before every customer sees a problem. History also gives one more uncomfortable lesson. Recovery is not automatic. The public often assumes that once the weather changes or a burst is fixed, the system simply returns to normal. But supply interruptions can leave behind a second workload: restoring pressure, flushing networks, managing bottled water, supporting vulnerable customers, communicating updates, investigating root causes, and rebuilding trust. A system that has failed once does not only need repair, it needs proof that the same weak pattern will not return. That is why Ofwat's language matters. The regulator did not only describe incidents, it criticized the company's ability to learn from them, plan for them, and maintain the infrastructure needed to reduce the chance of repeated supply disruption. In plain language, the watchdog was saying the problem was not only that things went wrong, it was that the system had not shown enough evidence that it could prevent similar failures under future stress. That connects directly to the July event. A hosepipe ban is one way of trying to prevent a similar failure before it spreads. Instead of waiting for widespread low pressure, the company attempts to cut non-essential demand. Instead of treating the public only as customers, it asks them to become part of the operating response. The restriction is inconvenient because it reaches into private life, but its purpose is to protect the refill cycle before the pressure map turns uneven. This is where the precedent becomes useful. It does not say July will become a disaster. It says the mechanism has consequences if ignored. When high demand persists and storage cannot recover, some customers may see low pressure or no water. When pressure weakens, geography matters. When geography matters, vulnerable groups may become exposed first. When vulnerable customers need help, the emergency becomes less about lawns and more about bottled water deliveries, care coordination, medical needs, and public confidence. Past incidents show that the endpoint is not theoretical. People have queued for bottled water before. Households have gone without normal supply before. The regulator has found serious failures before. Parliament has questioned leadership before. Local communities have already lived through the difference between a water company statement and a kitchen tap that does not deliver. That memory changes the meaning of the July ban. For someone who has never lost water, the restriction may look like a garden rule. For someone who has stood at a bottled water station, it looks like a warning. That is the emotional boundary of this story. Fear is not being added from outside. It comes from evidence. A person who has once filled containers because the tap stopped does not need a dramatic narration to understand why pressure matters. They know the sequence. First the update, then the low pressure, then the uncertainty, then the question of who needs water most urgently, then the realization that a modern home becomes fragile very quickly without something as ordinary as running water. A previous outage teaches the body what infrastructure means. It means the toilet flushes. It means medication can be taken. It means hands can be washed. It means food can be prepared. It means an older person can stay at home safely. It means a business can open. It means a school can function. When that chain breaks, the household learns that water security is not an environmental slogan. It is a daily operating condition. But the precedent also needs a clear evidence line. The July hosepipe ban should not be used to claim that every past outage was caused by climate change. It should not be used to claim that every future heatwave will create a water failure. It should not be used to say that Southeast Water's entire network is failing in exactly the same way everywhere. That would be too broad, and broad claims weaken the story. The stronger claim is narrower. Southeast Water has a documented history of supply interruptions, affecting large numbers of people. Regulators and parliamentarians have raised concerns about resilience, planning, maintenance, and headroom. Recent hot weather has already produced low pressure and outages in parts of Kent and Sussex. The July temporary use ban was issued because treated drinking water demand was outrunning the system's ability to treat and refill storage fast enough. Put together, these facts show a real operational risk, not a prophecy, a risk pattern. That distinction matters because systems can improve, infrastructure can be upgraded, storage can be added, treatment capacity can be strengthened. Leakage can be reduced. Emergency communication can become clearer. Demand can be lowered. Customers can change behavior during peaks. A precedent is not destiny. It is evidence of what happens when the weak point is not fixed before the next load arrives. And the load is changing. The older water planning world assumed that extreme events would be separated enough for recovery. A cold snap here, a hot spell there, a burst main in one place, a dry summer every so often. But the operational record suggests that recovery windows can be narrower than expected. A system may face heat after a dry spring, then storms, then cold, then bursts, then another period of high demand. Each event may have its own trigger, but the public experiences them as repeated unreliability. That is how trust erodes. Not in one announcement, in repetition. A customer may forgive one outage if the cause is clear and the response is strong. A community becomes less forgiving when the pattern returns. By the time a hosepipe ban arrives, the public does not only hear the technical reason, it hears the history. It remembers the previous outage, the queue, the update that changed, the bottled water site, the elderly neighbor, the school closure risk, the feeling that essential infrastructure had become conditional. That memory is part of the system now. Southeast Water has pointed to work on resilience and to reviews intended to learn lessons from past incidents. That also matters. The story is not only failure, it is a contested process of repair, scrutiny, investment, accountability, and adaptation. But repairs are judged during stress. A resilience plan becomes real only when the next heatwave arrives and the system either holds margin or loses it again. That is why the July event is a test. It is testing not just water demand, but institutional memory. Did the system learn from previous pressure failures? Did it build enough headroom? Did it protect treatment capacity? Did it improve communication with vulnerable customers? Did it reduce the chance that a heat-driven surge becomes a supply interruption? The past cannot answer those questions completely. The present is answering them in real time. This is not speculation. A version of this mechanism has already left evidence behind. The evidence is not that July must become a catastrophe. The evidence is that when water systems lose headroom under extreme conditions, the consequences can move quickly from operational charts into homes. And once that has happened in a region before, every new warning carries the weight of memory. The past does not repeat perfectly, but it rhymes through pressure, it rhymes through storage, it rhymes through the customer at the end of the main. It rhymes through the care worker filling bottles before the shift gets hard. It rhymes through the operator watching the tank level at dawn and hoping the curve climbed enough. That is the precedent the July ban carries with it. Not a guaranteed disaster, but a documented pathway from high demand to low pressure, from thin margin to household disruption, from official warning to human consequence. And if that pathway already exists, the next question is larger than Kent. What happens when this same pattern becomes part of England's future water calendar? The July ban is local, but the pattern is national. That is the term that makes the Kent story larger than Kent. A hosepipe restriction can begin as a company notice, a county map, and a list of banned outdoor uses. But underneath it is a question England has been trying not to ask too directly. What happens when the water calendar that infrastructure was built around no longer matches the weather calendar arriving outside? This is not only a hosepipe ban, it is a calendar failure. For decades, the old assumption was simple enough to feel permanent. Winter replenishes, spring transitions, summer draws down, autumn resets. That was never perfectly true, but it was stable enough for planning. Reservoirs, aquifers, treatment works, storage tanks, farms, gardens, towns, and emergency plans all leaned on some version of that rhythm. The system did not need every year to be average. It needed enough recovery, often enough to make the next high-demand season manageable. Now the rhythm is becoming less reliable. According to the Environment Agency's National Framework for Water Resources 2025, England is facing warmer and wetter winters, hotter and drier summers, changing rainfall patterns, more intense rainfall events. and greater incidence of drought and flooding. That is not a single weather warning. That is a planning statement from the national water system. The phrase sounds broad, but it has a very concrete meaning. More water can fall at the wrong time. Less water can be reliably available at the time. Demand rises. Winter can be wet and still not solve summer pressure. Rain can arrive as intense runoff instead of slow recharge. A dry spring can harden soils before heat arrives. A heat wave can then pull demand upward before the system has rebuilt enough margin. That is the new pattern. Water risk is no longer only about how much rain falls in a year. It is about when the rain falls, how fast it falls, where it goes, how much soaks into the ground, how much reaches reservoirs and aquifers, how much can be treated, and how much demand appears on the hottest days. The annual total can hide the operational truth. A country can receive rain and still face shortage if the rain arrives outside the system's useful window. That is why Kent matters. The county was not only experiencing a restriction, it was showing what happens when raw water stories and treated water realities separate. Southeast Water said winter rainfall had supported raw water resources, but treated drinking water demand still reached record or near record levels. Treatment works were running at full capacity, and storage tanks were being drained faster than they could be refilled. That is not a simple drought story. It is a throughput story. And throughput is where the future becomes uncomfortable. The Environment Agency's national framework says that without action, public water supply could face a deficit of up to about 5 billion litres a day by 2055, with further demand from other sectors. The Climate Change Committee has warned that water supply shortfalls could exceed 5 billion litres a day by mid-century, alongside escalating risks from heat and flooding. These are not predictions of one inevitable collapse. They are estimates of the gap between future demand and reliable supply if the system does not adapt fast enough. 5 billion litres a day is a hard number to feel. So translate it. It is not only a volume, it is millions of showers, millions of toilet flushes. Industrial processes, food production, cooling systems, hospitals, schools, care homes, farms, ecosystems, new houses, data centers, energy infrastructure, laboratories, cleaning, hygiene, manufacturing. Every litre is attached to a function. When the national framework talks about a deficit, it is talking about a future in which too many functions ask for reliable water at the same time. The number is not just water. It is society asking the same system to do more work under less predictable conditions. That is the system pattern. Population growth raises baseline demand. New housing expands the number of taps. Agriculture faces hotter and drier growing seasons. Businesses need water for cleaning, cooling, processing, and daily operation. Energy systems and digital infrastructure can create their own water needs. Nature needs water left in rivers and wetlands, not removed until the channel is exhausted. Regulators require better environmental protection. Customers expect uninterrupted supply, and all of this sits under a climate signal that is making heat, drought, and intense rainfall more disruptive. The old calendar prepared for seasons. The new calendar creates compound pressure. Compound pressure means the stresses arrive together, or close enough together that recovery is incomplete. A wet winter may cause flooding, but also recharge groundwater. A dry spring may reduce soil moisture and increase irrigation demand. A summer heat wave may raise household use and public health risk. Intense rain may arrive later, but fall too fast to restore the places that needed slow recharge. Each event may look separate on the news. The system experiences them as a sequence. The water network carries yesterday. That is the key to the pattern. It carries the wetness or dryness of the previous season. It carries leakage that has not yet been repaired. It carries treatment capacity built for older demand assumptions. It carries storage sized for past peaks. It carries public trust damaged by pollution, outages, bills, and regulatory failures. It carries investment decisions made years earlier. Then a heat wave arrives and asks all of those past conditions to perform today. This is why a hosepipe ban is not only a present-tense event, it is a test of accumulated choices. Were enough reservoirs built? Was enough treatment capacity added? Were leaks reduced quickly enough? Were pressure zones strengthened? Were vulnerable customers mapped and supported? Was demand reduced before the heat arrived? Did new housing come with enough water planning? Were nature's needs included before rivers were stressed? Did the system prepare for the old summer or the summer now arriving? That is the question England faces, not whether one county can get through one restriction. Whether the national water system is being upgraded fast enough for a changing load profile. The phrase, load profile, may sound technical, but it simply means the shape of demand over time. A system can handle a certain total volume if the demand is spread out. It can fail under a smaller total volume if too much arrives in the same hour. Heat changes the load profile by synchronizing behavior. Dryness changes it by making outdoor demand feel urgent. Public health risk changes it by making water more essential for cooling, washing, and care. Agriculture changes it by needing water when crops are already stressed. The future risk is not only more demand, it is sharper peaks. A sharp peak is harder to treat for, harder to pump for, harder to store for, and harder to communicate about. It is the difference between a steady stream of customers entering a station and a crowd arriving at one gate. The gate may be strong. The crowd may still overwhelm it. That is what treatment capacity failure reveals. The weak point is not always the total annual resource. The weak point can be the hour, the day, the week, when demand outruns conversion, movement, and recovery. Now, add geography. England's water risk is not evenly distributed. The southeast has dense population, high development pressure, and water resources that can be more exposed during dry periods. Eastern and southeastern regions can face strong agricultural and household demand when heat and dry springs align. Other regions may experience heavier rainfall and flooding, but flooding does not automatically solve water scarcity. Water in the wrong place, at the wrong speed, and with the wrong quality is not usable supply. That is the paradox of the future. A country can flood and face drought risk. A winter can be wet, and a summer can strain taps. A storm can dump water on streets while aquifers still need slow recharge. A reservoir can hold water, while a treatment works, lacks enough capacity to meet a heat-driven peak. The public wants water to be one problem. The system knows it is several problems connected by timing. This is not only a water event, it is a recovery event. Recovery is the part modern planning has underestimated. After a drought, the landscape needs time. After a flood, infrastructure needs repair. After a burst, pressure zones need stabilizing. After a heatwave, storage needs refill. After public trust is damaged, communication needs rebuilding. But if events arrive more often, recovery time shrinks. The system may not fail because one event is unprecedented. It may fail because the next event arrives before the previous one has been fully absorbed. That is how a new baseline forms, not as one dramatic line crossed forever, but as repeated stress becoming normal operating context. A drought group meets more often. Heat health alerts become familiar. Water companies issue more urgent conservation messages. Farmers adjust planting and irrigation decisions earlier. Customers learn the language of hosepipe bans, essential use, bottled water stations, and pressure zones. Regulators push for resilience. Government frameworks speak in billion-litre deficits. What once sounded exceptional becomes part of the annual script. But normalization is dangerous. When warnings become familiar, people may stop hearing them. When restrictions repeat, the public may see them as management failure rather than emergency prevention. When companies ask for conservation while leaks remain visible, trust weakens. When bills rise and service falters, cooperation becomes harder. And water resilience depends on cooperation. A demand reduction message only works if people believe the messenger, understand the mechanism, and feel the sacrifices shared. That is one of the largest system risks, not only physical scarcity, credibility scarcity. A water company can ask customers not to use hose pipes, but if customers see leaks in the street, sewage scandals in rivers, or repeated supply interruptions, the request arrives into anger. That anger may be justified, but the physics of the system does not pause for public trust to recover. If demand must fall to protect storage, demand must fall whether or not people are satisfied with the institution asking. This creates a dangerous gap. The infrastructure needs fast behavior change. The public needs proof of fairness. If that gap widens, the system loses one of its emergency tools. That is why future water security cannot rely only on telling households to do better. Household use matters. Hoses matter. Showers matter. Dripping taps matter. But the system also needs treatment capacity, storage, leakage reduction, new supply options, smarter demand management, environmental protection, planning controls, metering where appropriate, and honest communication. A hosepipe ban can slow a crisis. It cannot be the whole adaptation strategy. The next baseline requires more than restraint. It requires redesign. Redesign does not mean one simple project. It means asking every part of the water system whether it was built for the past calendar or the arriving one. Reservoirs and transfers may be needed in some places. Water recycling and desalination may be discussed in others. Nature-based catchment restoration may help slow runoff and support recharge. Smarter networks can detect leaks and pressure problems sooner. Building standards can reduce water use in new homes. Industrial planning can account for water before demand is locked in. Agricultural adaptation can change timing, crops, soil management, and irrigation efficiency. But every solution has a timeline, and heat arrives on its own schedule. That is why the July ban feels urgent. It is not because one restriction proves England's water future is already lost. It is because the restriction appears inside a national planning context that already admits the gap is large. If the framework says the future deficit could reach billions of litres per day, then a local treatment capacity failure is not a random inconvenience. It is a small window into the kind of operational stress that future planning is trying to avoid. The future does not arrive first as a full national shortage. It arrives as local weak points. A storage tank that fails to recover. A treatment works running at maximum output. A village on higher ground losing pressure. A care home needing assurance. A farm choosing whether to irrigate. A school checking toilets. A river needing environmental flow while customers demand more. A hot day turning optional water use into a system-wide load. That is how system risk announces itself. Through components, through timing, through margins. Kent's July restriction is one component in a larger pattern. The Environment Agency sees the National Resource Challenge. The Climate Change Committee sees heat, drought, and flooding as central climate risks. Public health officials see heat reaching bodies and services. Water companies see treatment and distribution limits. Customers see rules. Farmers see soil and crop stress. Nature sees lower flows and warmer water. Each perspective is incomplete alone. Together they describe a system moving out of its old operating range. That is why the story must not stop at the ban. The ban is only the surface rule. The deeper issue is whether England can build enough resilience before hotter, drier summers and sharper demand peaks become more frequent operating conditions. The old preparation calendar may not be enough if the next summer begins earlier, if dry springs become more consequential, if warm nights reduce recovery, if heavy rain arrives as runoff instead of recharge, and if new demand keeps being added to old networks. The future water system will be judged less by average conditions than by recovery under stress. Can it refill overnight? Can it protect pressure at the edge? Can it support vulnerable customers without emergency improvisation? Can it reduce leakage before heat arrives? Can it maintain environmental flows while serving homes and businesses? Can it turn wet winters into usable resilience for dry summers? Can it keep public trust strong enough for conservation messages to work? Those questions are not abstract. They are the real policy hidden inside a garden restriction. This is not only a hosepipe ban, it is a treatment capacity failure inside a national water transition. And a transition is dangerous when the old system is still carrying the load, while the new system is not yet fully built. That is where England is now. The future is visible in planning documents, climate assessments, drought meetings, investment programs, and public warnings. But the pipes, treatment works, reservoirs, storage tanks, homes, and habits still belong partly to an older expectation of seasons. The event will pass. The ban may eventually lift. The tanks may recover. The heat may break, but the pattern will remain. A system built around old assumptions is being tested by a world no longer following the old calendar. And the next test may not begin with a dramatic image. It may begin the same way this one did, with an official notice, a customer number, and a hidden line on a storage graph that did not climb enough overnight. The warning does not need exaggeration. The evidence is already enough. That is the line the story has to hold at the end. Because a water restriction during a heat wave can easily become a container for every fear people already have about climate, infrastructure, privatized utilities, drought, bills, leaks, growth, and the future. Some of those fears are grounded. Some are connected, but not identical. Some are still uncertain. And if we blur them together, we do not make the warning stronger. We make it less useful. So draw the evidence line carefully. What is solid is this. South East Water announced a temporary use ban for its Kent supply area, affecting about 850,000 customers. The company said the restriction was driven by sustained high temperatures and record or near-record demand for treated drinking water. It said every available treatment works and water source was running at full capacity. It said drinking water storage tanks were being drained faster than they could physically be treated and refilled. That is the core. Not rumor. Not speculation. An operational statement from the company responsible for keeping the taps running. It is also solid that this is not happening in a vacuum. Ofwat has investigated South East Water for repeated supply failures affecting hundreds of thousands of people in previous years, and the regulator said the company had not maintained enough resilience and headroom during periods of high demand. Parliament has examined supply failures in the company's region. The Environment Agency's National Water Planning Framework has warned that England could face a public water supply shortfall of around 5 billion litres a day by 2055 without continued action. Those facts do not say everything is caused by one thing. They say the system is under real pressure. Now draw the boundary around what should not be claimed. A hosepipe ban in Kent does not prove that every part of England is about to run out of water. It does not prove that every low-pressure incident has the same cause. It does not prove that one hot week created every weakness in a water network. It does not prove that winter rainfall no longer matters. It does not prove that climate change alone explains every outage, every leak, every management decision, or every investment delay. That would be too simple. And too simple is dangerous. The more accurate story is harder, but it is more powerful. Heat raises demand. Dry conditions can make outdoor use feel urgent. Customers open taps, showers, and hoses in overlapping windows. Treatment works have physical limits. Storage tanks need time to recover. Pressure zones expose geography when margin falls. Past resilience problems make present stress more serious. Future climate and population pressures make the old planning calendar less reliable. That is enough. The warning does not need a false certainty. It needs the public to understand the real mechanism. This is not just a hosepipe ban. This is a treatment capacity failure. And even that sentence needs to be understood correctly. It does not mean every tap has failed. It does not mean the whole system has collapsed. It means the weak point is the rate at which safe drinking water can be treated, stored, pressurized, and moved, while demand is pulling it out faster than the system can comfortably replace it. The failure is not always silence. Sometimes failure begins as lost margin. That is what makes the event so unsettling. Modern infrastructure does not always warn us with dramatic images. Sometimes it warns us with a curve on a storage graph. A treatment works at maximum capacity. A tank that did not refill enough overnight. A pressure zone that becomes harder to stabilize. A company asking customers to stop optional use before essential use becomes threatened. The public sees the rule. The operator sees the margin. The household feels the uncertainty. And that uncertainty is part of the damage. When a person begins listening to the tap, the system has already entered the home. When a care worker fills extra jugs because pressure might fall later, infrastructure has become labor. When an elderly resident drinks less because a public warning makes them feel guilty about using water, communication has become risk. When a garden is left brown, so a storage tank can recover, private life has been pulled into system protection. This is how operational failure moves. Not all at once, not evenly, not always visibly. It moves from heat to behavior, from behavior to demand, from demand to storage, from storage to pressure, from pressure to people, and from people back into the public trust that decides whether the next warning will be believed. That trust may be the most fragile reservoir of all. A water system needs pipes, pumps, treatment works, storage tanks, reservoirs, aquifers, rivers, engineers, and investment. But during a peak demand emergency, it also needs cooperation. It needs people with normal pressure to reduce optional use for people who may lose pressure first. It needs customers to believe that the restriction is not theater. It needs institutions to earn that belief by fixing leaks, investing in capacity, communicating clearly, protecting vulnerable customers, and telling the truth about what is known and what is not. If trust drains, demand messages weaken. If demand messages weaken, storage has less time. If storage has less time, pressure risk grows. The social system and the hydraulic system are connected. That connection is the future echo of this event. England's water future will not be decided only by how much rain falls in a calendar year. It will be decided by timing. When does the rain fall? How much reaches storage? How much recharges groundwater? How much arrives as runoff? How hot are the peaks? How warm are the nights? How many people need water at once? How fast can treatment works convert raw supply into safe drinking water? How much leakage steals treated water before it reaches a tap? How much recovery time remains before the next load arrives? The old question was, do we have water? The new question is, can the system make usable water fast enough, in the right place, under stress? That is the question Kent has placed in front of the country. The opening image was simple. An official company alert, a July restriction. About 850,000 customers, a heat-driven surge in treated water demand, a statement that storage tanks were being drained faster than they could be treated and refilled. At the start, it looked like a story about hosepipes. By now, it is something else. It is a story about a hidden factory behind the tap. It is a story about time inside a storage tank. It is a story about pressure at the edge of a network. It is a story about an older person in a warm room, a carer watching a glass, an operator watching a curve, and a county being asked to stop optional flow so essential flow can continue. The garden was never the center of the story. The garden was the visible door. Behind it was the treatment works. Behind that was the climate signal. Behind that was the planning question England cannot avoid. Can a water system built around older seasonal assumptions keep enough margin in a world where heat, demand, dry springs, intense rainfall, population growth, environmental limits, and public trust all collide in the same operating window? That question does not have a single answer. Some of the answer is engineering, more treatment capacity, more storage, stronger pressure zones, faster leakage reduction, better monitoring, smarter demand management, more resilient supply routes. Some of the answer is environmental, healthier catchments, protected rivers, groundwater recharge, less waste, more careful abstraction. Some of the answer is social, clearer communication, fair restrictions, support for vulnerable customers, public confidence that sacrifice is shared. But the first answer is recognition. We have to recognize the type of failure before we can adapt to it. This is not just a hosepipe ban. This is a treatment capacity failure. It is a warning that water security is not only about the presence of water, it is about the chain that turns water into a reliable service. A chain of treatment, storage, Pumping, pressure, repair, trust, and recovery. When that chain is strong, the tap feels ordinary. When that chain is stressed, ordinary becomes the thing everyone is trying to protect. The event will pass. The heat will break. The restriction may lift. The storage tanks may recover. The county may return to normal routines, and the hose may eventually uncoil in the garden again. But the thing revealed will remain. A system built around old assumptions is being tested by a world no longer following the old calendar. The next warning may not look dramatic at first. It may come as another official notice, another customer number, another heat alert, another phrase about demand, another storage graph falling faster than expected. And when it does, the question should not be only whether people can water their gardens. The deeper question should be whether the system still has enough time. Time to treat, time to refill, time to hold pressure, time to repair leaks, time to protect vulnerable people, time to recover before the next load arrives. Because the future will not be decided only by the peak number. It will be decided by whether the system can recover before the next demand wave reaches it. That is the lesson of Kent's July restriction. The map showed a hosepipe ban. The system revealed a capacity test, and the sound that matters most is not the sound of a sprinkler stopping in a garden. It is the ordinary sound of a tap still running in a hot room, because somewhere upstream, the system had just enough margin left to hold.